Yeah, well, let's jump to Isaiah. A couple of review questions, or verses, I mean, just to enlighten us before we jump into Babylon. Babylon of old and Babylon of new today. And he says in Isaiah, the jewel of the kingdom's Babylon. The pride and glory of the Babylonians will be overthrown by God like Sodom and Gomorrah. So you know it's not good awaiting them. Then you jump into the book of Revelation, he outlines it even more for what we have today, especially for poor Rome, as we detailed it in our discussions previously. He says, with the mighty voice he shouted, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling for demons and a haunt for every impure spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable animal. He says, for all the nations have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries. The kings of the earth committed adultery with her, and the merchants of the earth grew rich from her excessive luxuries. He says, then I heard another voice from heaven say, come out of her, he says, my people, so that you may not share in her sins, so that you will not receive any of her plagues. So we know there's a rescue plan in store for those that wise up at the last minute. For her sins are pulled up to heaven, and God has remembered her crimes. And he remembers all of our crimes, of course, but he says, give back to her as she has given, pay her back double for what she has done. He says, pour her a double portion for her cup. And we looked at these pictures before and how the Babylonians are very cute, and it's gone through history. Nothing has changed. What the devil does is just renames everything, right? And we see in this that Nimrod is the creator of Babylon, the temple and the city itself. He was the creator of it. And then Tammuz, his son. And you can see the mother, I can never get her name right there, Semiramis, the Queen of Heaven, highlighted. So it's the Father, Son, representative of the Holy Spirit. And you can see by the list there, and I'll back it up after the study when we shut it off if you want to take pictures of things. And but Nimrod of Babylon, he's considered here as the human son, S-U-N, God, and because he's the father of all these lies and the father of this creation that kind of hangs on, and it'll hang right on to the end there, how he gave himself over to what the devil has, and his face is on coins that they found, and that's what's his name, who tried to restore Babylon again? What's his name there? He was found in a hole, and they executed him, hung him. What's his name? Hey? Who? No, recent times. Recent war. Anyway, sorry? Yes, Saddam. He was Sad, you see, Hussein. And so it's he was creating himself. He was putting himself on the other side of the coin, saying himself being a relative. And through history, you get all these. Nothing has changed. All these pictures, you can still find the artwork, the coins. It's all there. It's very relevant, even though it's thousands of years old. And he says in Romans, he says they exchanged the truth of God for a lie, worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. He says, Amen. And you go, how in the world did the created things get in there? But it's they established the fertility god, which to them was the fish god, the amphibious beings. So it goes back to evolution. Where they say, where did we come from? We come from the fish, and that's where life began. And so they leave out God in the picture, and so they started establishing their priests. In fact, the king would wear these things, the queen would wear these things, where the fish became the central figure. And you see it all through their artwork, their pictures, where the fish became the central figure, that they worshipped him, and their priests wore these outfits of, I don't know, some kind of made-up thing that wouldn't have been real fish. It would have been pretty smelly. But all these fish things that they had there, and it's on the Persian priests, and that's the Mesopotamian, the Persians, the Babylonians are all the same in that area there. Always, bringing that person into wherever their afterlife was. You see, they all had an afterlife. But how it snuck into, I feel it snuck into the Church of Rome because they embraced everything early on in their history. They started embracing things, and probably a lot of the popes don't even have a clue where they come from. All they know is they're wearing these things that have been around since the Babylonians established it, at the fall of Babylon, and of course the Tower of Babel, which we get all this from. He's wearing all these fish on his mitre. You see it. You go, what in the world's going on here? I think a lot of Catholics probably don't even have a clue, but they're using the same thing, the religious mitre hat in Babylonia, and the priests doing the same thing, the same gestures you'll see through this. And the Pope has the same symbols, that they wear on their, and there's a lot more that we'll cover tonight. There's pages of the symbolic stuff that they wear. But all through their history, you can still find it on their tombs in Babylon. Nothing has really changed through it all that snuck into the churches today. So there's the king and the son there. So you can see it's a copycat of Jesus and God, right? And some more of those. I'm motoring through. I got quite a few, so I want to keep the Bible study down to at least 3 hours here tonight. Okay, but I thought this was kind of funny. Something is very fishy in the Western religion, right? Because they're going, because most people go, oh, wait a second, what in the world's going on here, right? And but in Jeremiah, he says, he will certainly do everything we said we would. We will burn incense to the Queen of Heaven. Remember, Samaria, she was the Queen of Heaven now. That's more or less, it's the part for us is the Holy Spirit. Queen of Heaven. We will burn incense to the Queen of Heaven, and we'll pour out drink offerings to her, just and as we and our ancestors, our kings, and our officials did in the towns of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem. At that time, we will be there. We had plenty of food and were well off and suffered no harm. In other words, they were just, when you're on the devil's team, everything seems to go fine. But God said it would rain on the unjust and the just. You always got to apply a lot of verses that I'm not covering tonight here. He says, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel says. You and your wives have done what you said you would do when you promised. You will certainly carry out the vows we made. He says to burn incense and to pour out drink offerings to the Queen of Heaven. He says, go ahead then. Do what you promised. Keep your vows. God's saying, go ahead. Do what you want. If you want to do those things, just go right ahead. But then, he says in Jeremiah, the children gather wood, the fathers light the fire, the women knead the dough and make cakes, offered to the Queen of Heaven. They pour out drink offerings offered to other gods to arouse my anger. So he's not happy with all these, the Queen of Heaven. And there's only 3 verses in Jeremiah that talks about the Queen of Heaven. It's very slight, but it's enough. Like it arouses God's anger. So here Samaris is here as wearing the fish head and being the Queen of Heaven. And there's, from their statues, you can see a comparison of what's going on. It would upset a lot of Catholic folks, but it's the comparisons are too uncanny. Of the women that are worshipped of the Queen of Heaven all through history, you can see with Artemis, Athena, Diana, Venus, all these. Nothing's new under the sun. It just keeps changing names, you see, that we have here. And with the Greek mythologies, if you like Starbucks, sorry. But that's their historical pictures of Starbucks, the pictures, and you wonder where we get all these mermaids from, right? And everything else to do with the women. It comes from that one picture you see of Samaris there, of herself, and they get these, they think it's, I suppose maybe the creator of Starbucks didn't know what they were getting into. Maybe they did. they sneak the stuff into us that we have today that we don't even have a clue. We're just after a cup of coffee that we can't drink, right? And then there's other different forms that she has, pictures, artwork, all through history. There's a lot. When we were in Israel, I saw this picture and I thought it was kind of uncanny. It was in over top of the church of, I think of the Church of Mary, and how that God and Jesus has made Mary queen. And I don't think she'd be very happy with all this. But it's very, very prominent that she becomes the queen of heaven, right? That's what they call her. I don't know if you know that. And so if she becomes the queen, then she has rulership. And you have to ask yourself, if there's a king and a queen, do they have more rulership over the son? See what happens here? You can just play it out. But this is their artwork. You know, you can go see this at the Vatican, different Catholic churches. And I saw the woman was drunk with the blood of God's holy people, the woman, you know, and blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. When I saw her, he says, I was greatly astonished. God said, you know, through the book of Revelation that these things would take place. And you see her there. They got the big statues. This is in the Vatican, and they more prominence of her than Jesus in most times, right? Revelation says, "The woman whom you saw is the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth." You know, it's the Vatican. And you got to ask yourself sometimes, because it's in the news, very prominent. What does the Pope have to say about anything? You know, and he does. He always says something about something. And they make it a highlight in the news. I don't know if you've noticed that. But the royalty that, if you back it up to, you know, and it gets into, we discussed this in chapter 18 and 19, but the royalty, the purple, the robes, everything that go with it, right? And some of the things that are queen, some things that you don't realize, the old statues from Babylon. And they do a huge comparison. Even the Statue of Liberty, she's based on these statues. People don't realize that. They think she's Liberty. Well, she's more than that. If you go back to her creator that created her in France and shipped her off to the States, you see, it's all there. Isaiah says, I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. Now, this is speaking of God. I'm going fast because of the recording there, Joshua. And I will ascend. So Satan's goal is to make himself God, make himself better than God, like the Most High. And of course, this is very, very prominent in Babylonian or Persian culture, their history. Now, a lot of the history disappeared when the Muslims took over, but because they're not fond on artwork, they're not fond on faces or heads. They usually break the statues off, but a lot of it's out there. And this is in, I think, the EU, where they probably place the king of Babylon is their king. You go, what in the world does that have to do with anything of the EU? He's there, and the statues are there. And of course, this guy keeps showing up all over. He showed up in New York City also, and they didn't like that very much, the prominence of the beast from the book of Revelation. And this is Dagon, or Moloch, sorry. Jesus encountered the Moloch in the valley when they were burning babies and alive, and his hands would have been together, the Moloch statue. This is presented, I think it's still there. A couple of years ago it was presented to the Vatican, so they set up a room for it. I don't know about setting up a room in my house to this guy, but they found this big statue and they brought it to Rome for display. This is very prominent. There's these statues have shown up all over the States. If you've noticed, you go online, you say, where is this? It's all over the place. Very, very prominent, because they show the children being cared for by the devil himself. And you notice his fingers there, the statue of the devil himself, and his fingers. You see, he's a fallen angel. It's got wings, you see, and all these things, you see. I know I'm going fast, but you see the fingers, that the priests and popes, I don't even know why they're doing it. They probably don't even know why they're doing it, but you go back and you go, is that uncanny or what? You see, we haven't got time to talk about the Masonic, but that's a whole new Bible study there, where it comes from. But the kings of the earth, and the symbols are very, very, very bold. They start worshiping the sun god. He becomes the sun god that we have there. We've discussed before. You see it in their artwork, that the sun is always very prevalent there. The king is there, and they're always worshiping. You can see there the sun, moon, and stars in their artwork, that they start worshiping this. God doesn't appreciate this. And in the Babylonian, Persian culture, was always there in their statues, especially. They carved out. They're very bold about it. They're putting the king above the people. You can see, and it's worshiping the sun and the stars and the moon. The upside down moon with the star in the middle. It's kind of a guessing game in there, but you can see how the Muslims have adopted this symbol as their symbol. So you kind of, if you adopt a symbol as your symbol, you're kind of saying to the world where you're coming from, right? It's very, very simple that way. But you can see all their symbols. The crescent moon, the star in the middle is the Muslims' signature to the earth, so you know where they come from, right? Their thinking. Ezekiel says, "He then brought me into the inner court in the house of the Lord, and there at the entrance to the temple between the portico and the altar were about 25 men with their backs towards the temple of the Lord and their faces toward the east. They were bowing down toward the sun and the moon." Even in Ezekiel's day, he found them, he caught them, worshiping the sun and the moon and everything, because he says in Jeremiah, he criticizes them also. They'll be exposed to the sun and the moon and the stars of the heavens, which they have, he says, which they have lowered and served, which they have followed and consulted. So this has been going on a long time, since Babylon. It's been going on a long time. They will not be gathered up or buried, but will be like dung lying in the ground. Unless you're a farmer, that's not a good picture, right? He says in 2 Kings, he did away with the idolatrous priests appointed by the kings of Judah. He says to burn incense on the high places of the towns of Judah and on those around Jerusalem, those who burned incense to Baal, to the sun and the moon, to the constellations and all the starry hosts. So he throws it in. Remember, Elijah had to encounter this, with the priests that had to get, that fire came down from heaven and consumed. But he was saying, when you're doing this, you're worshiping Baal. So it goes back to the devil himself. It goes back to Babylon itself, of what they're worshiping. Nothing new under the sun. You've seen the Eye of Horus. A lot of actors do that. You ever noticed that? Maybe you haven't, where they're going like this. They'll do this. That's a symbol of the Eye of Horus, and it's the worshiping the sun and the moon. They're actually saying that they're not Christians, and unless they're just doing it for the fun of it. But there's a whole list of actors who are very bold about just portraying the Eye of Horus, and it goes back to worshiping sun and worshiping the moon and not worshiping God himself. And there's all kinds of symbols. This is one of the oldest ones in Europe of portraying the sun as the Eucharist, not God. They'll say it is the sun, but it's not. You see, so it's the sun worshiping. There's all these symbols they've snuck in, and they always use the Catholic Church. I'm not sure why they did that, unless they think it's just fancy gold, but it's they portray the Eucharist as the brilliance of the sun. And so they start worshiping, you could say they're worshiping the wrong thing, right? When they're holding up the sun instead of S-O-N, the sun. And nothing new, but all the popes have been doing this when they do the Eucharist, of worshiping the sun. And great criticism of Elijah. Jeremiah would have some great issues with this, of how, but isn't it interesting how through Israel's history they got caught doing it over and over again. They got caught slipping away over and over again, and now we as Christians, you think would be wiser. couple thousand years later. We haven't gotten any wiser. As Christians, we keep slipping back in time and don't even know why we're doing it, right? So it's basically the worship of the sun. They make no bones about it. And there you have one of the oldest stones from Persia, where the king and his wife and the son there worshiping the stars and sun, moon, and stars, right? It's very, very prominent in their culture. And I'm going to jump into a couple little things here because how it slips into, you could say, the church. Well, there's a group out there called themselves Christian witches, and they sneak into churches because they still consider themselves Christians. I was at one church where the Masons were in the church, and we found out because one of them forgot their Bibles there. And I went, what? You see, because we're Christians. But you can't have two things. You see, it's one or the other, and they like to dabble in a lot of things, but there's all kinds of witches out there. This was one of this coffee company, I won't name who, had the one year had the satanic symbol on their cup. There's no video that I'm not going to show tonight because it's Helen did it, but now Helen's been exposed, where she was mocking God and holding up this satanic cup, saying "Merry Christmas" to everybody. You know, she was mocking God on her program, but she's been exposed for her little deeds, I suppose, and it shows up in everywhere. I remember Jesus himself went when he was telling Peter and the apostles and said, on this rock, right? And people thought it was Peter they're talking to. That Jesus was saying on this rock, because Petros means rock. No, he says on this rock, in the Greek language, on this rock I will build my church. On this, he was not saying they were above him. He was telling Peter, says on this rock, he's called himself the rock, right? Which rock he established on. There's many verses with that. And so we turn it around and think it was all about Peter. It wasn't about Peter. It was about Jesus telling Peter to build my church. That's what it was all about. But in that same area where he was confronting this, and I've done sermons on this, where they were sitting and they were looking at the statue of this fellow, half goat and half man. That's what's the name? Pan. His name is Pan, and the Romans and the Greeks worshipped him, and they had a huge statue of him as they were sacrificing the slaves always, in the waters there. But it was the Pan god, but you know who it is. But Jesus called it the gates of hell. That you could do such a thing like this, it's like a gate of hell, as you turn your back on the true God, right? And it shows up all through history. Doesn't matter what culture it is, it's always there. I don't like snakes, just saying. But it's always, and it's the witchcraft and the occult, right? This guy was called the most hated man in Europe. Anybody seen this face? Aleister Crowley. He was considered he started the Satanic Church way back in the day. And he was considered the most hated man in Europe, even by non-Christians. They just said he's the most hated man. He had all kinds of, he drew this. He said this was his spirit guide. So as we dive into, because I want to leave some time at the end, as we dive into, and we'll have time in the end, I can back up for you after I shut the video off, but it looks kind of familiar. Well, number one is his spirit guide's bald. I don't know how that had anything to do with it, but he got a big head, and all through history, whenever the spirit guides show up, they're kind of the same. We would call them today aliens, but he called it his spirit guide, and he drew a picture, said, this is who leads me. And he was a very occultist guy, Aleister Crowley. This is pictures of him. You can see he's just not your favorite uncle, for sure, right? But he was into the occult. These are pictures from his past. You see, it was all about aliens. It was nothing to do with God. It was about his spirit guides, you see. And he says, no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as a angel of light. And I don't know, Josh, if you can click off, if you know how to do that really fast, to click off, because I want to show that just a few-minute video, and then we're going to open up for questions. No, not that one. This one here. If you just click off the online on here and start the video that's there, right? You know how to do that? Yeah, there's several clickers there. Eh? Yeah, this is the red button at the top of the screen. No, the other screen. Yeah, the big one. Yeah, sorry, Josh. Yeah, I got several things. There we go. And go ahead and click that. Let's click the picture.
A topic that I am very fascinated by. So with all of these recent UFO sightings, in your opinion, Dr. Ross, is there any validity to these?
Well, I think there is a validity to it. I mean, I wrote this book, Lights in the Sky on Little Green Men, with two of our colleagues here at Reasons to Believe on UFOs back in 2002. What's happening today is not just the United States, but several governments around the world has said they're going to release their classified documents on UFOs. But they've already released quite a lot. And I'm anticipating that the new releases are simply going to affirm what's already been released in the past. Namely, that there's millions of UFO sightings being reported, and most of them can be naturally explained, or military events, or they could be a hoax. But there's a 1% residual, and this is what's got the public fascinated. But what I've seen in my own experience of processing UFO reports is that where you got multiple observers in different sites, where you can actually triangulate the path of the UFO going through the atmosphere, there are times when they're recorded at moving at 15, 18,000 miles per hour. But as these observers see them going through our atmosphere, they see no heat friction and no sonic boom.
Right.
And there's 2,000 instances where these things have been observed going through the atmosphere and crashing into the earth. And when you go to the crash site, the ground is depressed. There's a shallow crater. If there's snow, the snow is melted. Vegetation is damaged. But when you investigate the site, there's no debris, there's no artifacts. If this was an actual physical craft, there would be debris that you could actually pick up. In this case, there's nothing. But you do see that something has happened, because something depressed the ground, something melted the snow and damaged the vegetation.
Could it be a meteorite?
Well, if it's a meteorite, you're going to find bits and pieces of the meteor.
Okay.
And when a meteorite goes through the atmosphere, you see a bright glow. There's heat friction. And if the object is moving faster than the speed of sound, you're going to get a sonic boom. The fact that there's no sonic boom, no heat friction, and at the site there's nothing to recover tells us we're dealing with something that definitely is real, but it's not physical. These things violate the laws of physics. And what's being revealed in the US reports are naval pilots recording these UFOs moving at thousands of miles per hour and making sharp right angle turns. A physical object can't do that. If you make that sharp right angle turn, it's going to do damage to the craft, and any being on board would be destroyed if they're physical.
Oh.
So again, we're dealing with non-physical reality.
Right.
Now, when I was a graduate student at the University of Toronto, I briefly had as a professor Carl Sagan. He was extremely dismissive of UFOs, says they absolutely don't exist. There's nothing to them. But he had the worldview that there's nothing beyond physical reality. As a Christian, I believed in non-physical reality. So that explains why I take the UFO data seriously and why people like Carl Sagan do not. Because God created this universe. He created it from beyond space-time, matter, and energy. There is reality beyond the physical universe. And the Bible tells us that God created two distinct species of intelligent life. We human beings that are constrained by the laws of physics and the space-time dimensions of the universe, and angels that are not constrained by our physics. and not constrained by the cosmic space-time dimensions. So what we document in this book is that we're dealing with an angelic phenomena. They are intelligent beings. They're coming to us from different dimensions. And I'm not alone in drawing that conclusion. I've known of 6 physicists who, like me, have devoted more than 10 years to studying the UFO phenomena, where we all agree, as I say, we're dealing with a transdimensional or an interdimensional phenomena. And therefore, these are not beings from a distant planet. They're not beings like us. They're beings from beyond the universe itself that are coming into our realm. And this has always been with us. I mean, UFOs are not new. They've been around for thousands of years. What's interesting is they seem to keep pace with our technology. So 100 years ago, people were reporting UFOs as slow-moving dirigibles in the atmosphere. World War II, they were the Foo Fighters that were moving at 700 miles per hour. Today, they're being reported at moving at 18,000 miles per hour. And then when people have messages from these so-called beings,
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
well, it was Alan Hynek, the American astrophysicist, who coined the terms close encounters. And what he meant by that is where you get less than 500 feet away from a UFO encounter. And a close encounter of the third kind is where there's communication going on from the UFO being and the human being. And they too have been changing their story over time. 100 years ago, the message was, we're from the backside of the moon. And by about 50 years ago, they said, well, people don't understand. Life's not possible on the backside of the moon. So they said they were from Venus. And when the lay public became aware of how hot it is on the surface of Venus, they said they were from Mars. Well, now their story is they're from a distant planetary system. So they keep changing their story. But I think what's most fascinating to me as an astrophysicist and as a Christian is there's actually documented cases where the UFO being puts the human being into a trance. And when they're in a trance, they do automatic writing. It's like they take dictation from the being. And probably the most famous example of that is the Urantia book. It's about 4,000 pages long, all messages communicated to this automatic writing, but about a third of the total content is denying the deity of Jesus Christ. So that's why we conclude there's a deceptive motivation behind these UFO beings. And moreover, when they do have close contact with humans, the effects are always deleterious. It's never beneficial. The best you're going to come away from in these encounters is recurring, terrifying nightmares. What's the worst case? You get killed by the incident. Many people have been injured. Some have even been killed. So this is not a friendly encounter. They mean us harm, and they mean to deceive us, and they seem to have a motivation to spiritually deceive us. And that's also what's interesting about my fellow physicists. As far as I know, I'm the only Christian that's actually dedicated research onto this as a physicist. But the other 6 I mentioned, they all agree with me that we see here is a one-to-one correspondence with witchcraft, the occult, and demonology. And we talk about in this book, this is a testable scientific hypothesis. If you will close all the doors to occult activity in your life, that will be the end of your UFO encounters. On the other hand, if you begin pursuing the occult, these things are going to happen to you. And I went to Russia when the communists were still in control, the old Soviet Union. And that was a time when the Soviet government was sponsoring research on occult physics in an attempt to develop new weaponry. And what I observed when I was speaking there in the Soviet Union is a very high percentage of the population, and especially the scientists, who are having multiple UFO encounters. Today, that's virtually gone because the climate has changed. But you also see that around the world. Where do you see the highest UFO encounters? equatorial Brazil. You see it in France. These are regions of the world where a lot of people are involved in the occult.